Okay, so today we've got U.S. Senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy. Thanks for braving the holiday break and joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Let's jump in. We see so much blatant corruption happening in broad daylight with regard to Trump trying to subvert the election results. Like, he literally brought Michigan lawmakers to the White House to pressure them into not certifying the results of the election that he himself lost. I think something disheartening for a lot of people is this notion that there's going to be a lot more focus on moving forward than there is on holding these people accountable. So what's your stance on the whole accountability versus moving forward debate?
Well, I think it's a really important debate to have because the tail of this corruption is substantial, right? The damage that Trump is doing to democratic norms right now, in that he is convincing 30 to 40% of the American public that elections are illegitimate if Democrats win, that doesn't go away, right? This election wasn't close enough for him to steal. He lost by substantial margins in a whole bunch of states. But what if 2 years or 4 years from now, QAnon has taken over Secretary of State's offices and election boards, and there's a U.S. Senate candidate, a Democrat, who's up by 10,000 votes instead of 150,000 votes. That certainly seems stealable if the presumption on behalf of Republicans is that if Democrats win, it must be because somebody cheated. So your question is, what do we do about it? Well, listen, there's nothing that stops Trump legally from bringing these lawsuits. He's not behaving illegally if he's bringing lawsuits. But query whether there's any illegality in using the Oval Office to try to pressure private sector individuals to do his political bidding. So I don't think the president likely has the power to pardon himself, but he's likely thinking about it because he will be exposed to potential investigation and prosecution after this is all said and done. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not going to make those calls, but certainly he's engaged in a just cornucopia of action that exposes him legally after he's left office.
To build on your point, basically, isn't not doing anything now basically just tacit permission for Republicans to do this again next time?
Yeah, and again, there's a dividing line between the action that Trump's taking that's reckless but not illegal, and actions he may be taking that are illegal. I mean, coming up with conspiracies about, voting machines being rigged by Hugo Chavez is insane, but it's not necessarily illegal. Neither is bringing lawsuits, but there may be a line that he's crossing here, and if so, I think all of us should be willing to support accountability.
Would you support investigations into Trump himself and people like Louis DeJoy, for example, who've obviously got legal exposure?
I have not sort of decided at this point what is necessary for criminal investigation or not. That frankly isn't my role. In fact, there's a good reason for me to stay separate from decisions that are being made about criminal investigation or criminal prosecution. Frankly, the minute that folks in the legislature start calling for judicial prosecutions, that frankly probably hampers their case, not helps their case. So we've got work to do to investigate via our congressional authority. I don't know that it necessarily makes a lot of sense for me to be calling on prosecutors to be conducting certain investigations or bringing certain claims.
So let's move over to the General Services Administration. GSA finally ascertained Biden's win. They freed up $6.3 million for the transition. So now we have the GSA who's acknowledged Biden's win. We have the states that have acknowledged Biden's win, including the secretaries of state of both parties. We have most Americans who've acknowledged Biden's win. Have you spoken to Republican senators privately about this effort to deny reality?
I have. I've spoken to a number of my Republican colleagues about it. Their take on this was, pretty simple. I think they acknowledged that Biden won. They are still 4 years later so afraid of Donald Trump that they don't want to cross him publicly, and that they hope it will all go away once the certifications happen and the electors are appointed. So I had a number of Republicans say to me versions of, oh yeah, you just got to sort of let him get his steam out. After the electors are selected, then I think this all disappears. Whether they're doing anything behind the scenes to try to actually make that come true, I don't know. But that is what they say behind the scenes, that Biden won, Trump's off his rocker, but we can't really confront him on this, at least until the electors are chosen. The electors are chosen to make their determination.
I mean, doesn't even their refusal to publicly acknowledge this have impacts elsewhere? I mean, this is supposed to be the party of patriots and constitutionalists, and it's basically just devolved into cult of personality for Trump, and it allows conspiracy theories to breed. And I mean, that's what we're seeing happen right now. I mean, it's not as if their actions aren't without consequence.
It's hard to kind of categorize the harm done to democracy over the last 4 years, given all of Trump's assaults. But there's an argument to suggest that what he has done in the last 30 days is worse for democracy than almost anything that he did during his 4 years, because the only thing that holds democracy together in the end is a belief in the integrity of elections, the belief that we all have the right to cast votes to determine the course of this country. And as I mentioned at the outset, Brian, what I really worry is that you are now going to have 40% of the electorate that believes these elections are rigged, specifically believe that elections are rigged when Democrats win. And so I don't know how the Republican Party recovers from that. And that's why you are right. Even if Joe Biden eventually becomes president, and he will, the damage that's been done to democracy, that's being allowed to be done to democracy by Republicans who have remained silent through all of this, is potentially permanent.
Does this transition, or lack thereof, which basically showed major flaws in the process, is it a priority that these procedures be shored up moving forward?
I mean, there's always going to be some element of human discretion involved in these transitions, right? The president, the transition, right, is not a constitutional mechanism, right? All the Constitution says is that the president is the president until he's not any longer, right? There's a day at which there's a new president. There's nothing in the Constitution that requires there to be this interim period in which one administration is handing over to the next administration. But there are certainly things that we can look at to make this better, right? What we thought we were doing in housing in the GSA, the ability to begin the transition, was to insulate the beginning of the commencement of the transition from politics, because we generally don't have sort of political hacks at the head of GSA. It probably does make sense now to look at some other trigger mechanism for the beginning of the transition, to try to find some other entity or individual who is even more insulated, who maybe is not appointed by the president, who can begin that transition. That may be a complicated sort of arrangement, maybe an independent commission, for instance, that lasts for a period longer than one administration. But certainly, I think at this point, we need to understand that what we have now still vests far too much power in the incumbent president to block a transition from happening. And given how big the bureaucracy is now and how high the stakes are with respect to national security and public health protectedness, that transition period is really important. You can't mess that up now without some risk accruing to domestic and national security.
So let's move over to Georgia. We've seen a number of Republican senators get involved in the Georgia race. Joni Ernst, I believe, was in Georgia this past week. What's being done on the Democratic side to help win those seats? And by the way, I know that you and Brian Schatz have raised a ton of money on Twitter on an almost daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if Warnock and Ossoff want Democratic senators in Georgia, we'll be there, right? If they want us to help raise them money, which I think is their ask right now, then we're going to help them raise money. And so I've been, one of the most active members of the Senate with respect to resourcing those two campaigns, as well as Fair Fight. And I will continue to do that. We also have a role to play in terms of defining the stakes. right? We don't need to be overly apocalyptic about what a Mitch McConnell Senate looks like, but let's be honest. There's very little hope for Joe Biden to be able to effectuate much at all of his agenda if Mitch McConnell is in charge. Why wouldn't Mitch McConnell do to Joe Biden exactly what he did to Barack Obama in 2009? So, we're in a position, having worked with Mitch McConnell, to explain to the country and to explain to voters in Georgia what it is, what the consequences of their choice are going to be. And for all the people who came out in Georgia and voted for Joe Biden, you need to all come back out and support Warnock and Ossoff, because if either Loeffler or Perdue win, you're essentially asking for gridlock. You are asking to give Mitch McConnell the power to block everything and anything that Joe Biden wants, including a pandemic relief bill.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And that's also a good segue into the issue of messaging. And this is an issue that I think that you've been especially effective at. And one of the reasons I was looking forward to talking to you, I touched on this last week in an interview with Congressman Schiff, but Democrats are the party of working people. We're the party of expanding healthcare, of raising the minimum wage. And yet you look in Florida, a $15 minimum wage beat Biden by 13 points. So where's the disconnect and how do we fix it?
So you can ask that question this way. How did Donald Trump become the anti-status quo candidate, right? Both in 2016 and in 2020. Why are Democrats having a hard time convincing people that we are the anti-status quo party? And I don't have all the answers to that question right now, Brian, but it is the essential question we need to be asking, because what we know is that the status quo is unacceptable to the American people. And it is unacceptable to the sort of mass of voters that have abandoned the Democratic Party for candidates like Donald Trump and his ilk. And they are voting for Trump because they think that he is the most likely to blow up the status quo. Now, he obviously didn't do that. He put the industries that have been bilking individuals and families in charge of the agencies that they make money from. He didn't lead any effort to change laws through Congress that would help ordinary people. But even at the end of all of that, there were still all sorts of people that just didn't believe that we were going to blow up the economic order. And I guess I admit that I don't have all the answers here, but you are right that when people have the chance on an issue basis to change the economic order, like instituting a $15 minimum wage, like in Arizona choosing to tax the very, very rich to fund schools, they jump at that opportunity. But then they don't support
marijuana.
Right, they don't just support, but they don't, with the same level of enthusiasm, support the Democratic candidates that back those policies. And listen, I think Joe Biden in the end was the right candidate to run for president this year. But we better learn lessons from the candidates in our party that do have enthusiastic backings across the nation. Frankly, people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, these are candidates who talk about broad, major economic change every single day, every single hour of every single day. They're laser-like focused on taking power from people who have too much and giving it to people who have too little. And both are important, right? Both are important, talking about who you are taking power from and who you're giving it to. And that's the other thing the Democrats don't love doing. We like talking about who we're going to give power to. We don't always love talking about who we're going to take it from. Donald Trump talks about who he's going to take it from all the time, right? He is
even if he doesn't actually go ahead with it. Yeah.
Right. Sometimes, right. I mean, and when he villainizes Mexicans and Muslims, that's another way of just telling people, hey, I'm going to take things from them and give it to you. That kind of oppositional politics, while it may make Democrats uncomfortable, it is motivating for voters. Yeah. And we need to engage in it while identifying the right oppositional force, right? The corporations and the billionaires and the Fortune 500 retailers that are killing small businesses. And we have to, identify the people who have too much power and name them.
I think that's a good lesson in, moving forward, not kind of being afraid. For better or for worse, that's a little bit of the reputation that we've gained. But I do want to, segue into this issue of disinformation a little bit. A major issue from the last 4 years has been the spread of disinformation. Trump and Fox News basically groomed their base to traffic in lies. So How do you reprogram people who've been programmed to believe outright lies? How do we come back to a place where people even acknowledge basic reality?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. It's a great question, and again, I think it's hard to sort of start with a question of tactics. I think you have to sort of understand why people are grasping for these big, broad, overarching theories. And I think it comes from a place of desperation. I think you have to understand how desperate people are to explain what has happened to their lives, right? What happened to go from a world in which, my parents could pretty easily access the middle class and be able to afford healthcare and a decent place to live and a college education for their kids. And I can't afford any of that, right? And so they often are attracted to these sort of big, easy to understand theories about how that is happening.
Even if they're conspiratorial, or
they're wildly conspiratorial, that there's somebody out there that is doing this to me, right? And so if you aren't delivering them some other, if you aren't delivering them access to a different theory, and then to a pathway of radical change, then I don't know that you can compete with the conspiracy theorists. So, we can talk about limiting the, trying to control the Twitters and the Facebooks of the world, and trying to limit the aperture for these conspiracy theories to reach big population centers. But we can also understand why people are attracted to those conspiracy theories and offer them some alternative salvation, some way to explain what's happened to their lives, and to tell them how things are going to be different. It also, but if we do want to talk about tactics, understanding that no company should have the power that a Facebook has or a Twitter has. I mean, I do think we have to have a conversation about dramatically downsizing the power of those companies, so that if they do make mistakes, it doesn't ultimately affect as many people as it does today.
Yeah, and I think moving forward, like, that tactics argument is going to be especially important, because, as if Fox News wasn't bad enough over the last 4 years, now we have basically people migrating over to the OANs and the Newsmaxes of the world, because somehow Fox News isn't conspiratorial enough. We have Parler spouting up as a new, an alternative to Twitter, and that's a right-wing echo chamber. So there is the worry that if these issues aren't addressed kind of head on, and like you said, taken if they're not addressed, at a substantive foundational level, then it can only get worse.
Yeah, and it's all an indictment of the political class, right? I mean, folks don't identify with the way that we talk. They don't identify with our addiction to incremental change, right? And so they want a bigger explanation of what's happening, and they want people who are going to enact bigger changes. And so every day that we talk about small adjustments to the tax code, or little modifications to the healthcare system, a little extra tax credit for college, it's just another day that we are not connecting with where people are, and where these sort of big think conspiracy theorists jump in to fill the vacuum.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, Senator, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.